The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
Experience a membership that backs what you're building with American Express Business Platinum. Enjoy complimentary access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection and apply to find out your welcome offer, which could be as high as 300,000 membership rewards points. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Welcome offers vary and you may not be eligible for an offer. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
Morning decisions. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 75, Ming, China. A few episodes back and we discussed the fall of the Song dynasty of southern China in the year 1279. The Mongols were not known for their naval expertise, but following their conquest of the Jin dynasty of northern China, they would become familiar with the Chinese knowledge of shipbuilding. This would ultimately enable the Mongols to finish off the Song at the sea battle called the Battle of Yuan. China was now entirely in foreign hands for the very first time in its history. The Mongols established a new ruling dynasty of China called the Yuan Dynasty. The Mongol Emperor of China was Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. It would be Kublai Khan and his successors who would lead China into the 14th century. During Kublai Khan's lifetime, Yuan China would look to expand its local influence. Invasions of Japan and Southeast Asia took place. Domestically, Kublai Khan would introduce a style of caste system to China. Mongolians would be the highest class of people and would occupy the most influential political positions. The next class would be made up of non-Chinese foreigners, so somebody like Marco Polo is likely to be considered in this second tier called Senmu. The lowest two classes were the Han population, or those who were ethnically Chinese, with those in the far south receiving the fewest privileges and the harshest punishments. This situation would create ill feeling within the lowest classes. Certainly since the age of the Tang dynasty of China, which lasted from the 7th to the 10th century, a type of porcelain called blue and white porcelain was being produced. During the age of the Yuan dynasty, the art of blue and white porcelain production was being perfected and became much more widespread and popular, and this would continue to grow in popularity in the future. The Yuan would produce a higher quality clay and blue pigment and would produce more due to the fact that they believed that they could sell it to other cultures at the western ends of the Silk Road. The most iconic emperor of Yuan China was Kublai Khan, but the dynasty would continue on after his death in 1294. Kublai Khan's crown prince was his son Genjing, but Kublai Khan would not be succeeded by his crown prince, as Jing was an alcohol abuser, and it led to his premature death. With Kublai Khan outliving his heir, the throne would be taken by a son of Jin called Timur Khan. Timur Khan would endeavour to maintain the stability of his grandfather's realm and is considered to have done a decent job. It was after the reign of Timur Khan that things started to go wrong. Political infighting between potential successors for the throne caused a weakening of centralised rule, and the stable days of Kublai Khan's rule were now becoming a memory. Corruption among senior officials was further debilitating the central state, and further to that, those wonderful paper promissory notes that were making the economy more efficient in the days of Kublai Khan were now being forged, and this was causing inflation to surge. Things were spiralling out of control. Yuan, China, was crying out for a strong leader to take control and reorganise things, but this didn't happen. Instead, bad fortune would worsen things even more. In 1344, the Yellow River flooded, causing devastation to neighbouring lands and completely changing the course of the river. Something needed to be done, so the central state used the native Han people, the lowest of the caste system, to build embankments, and this proved to be highly unpopular among the Han. Combining all of these factors, such as natural disasters causing floods, droughts and famine, with overinflation and the egregious suppression of the native ethnic Han people, and it would become very convenient to claim that the Mongols had lost the mandate of heaven, the divine approval of the leader. Groups such as the White Lotus movement would claim that the displaced Song dynasty of rulers were the true rulers that possessed the mandate of heaven. The White Lotus was a Buddhist political sect that had existed in China possibly from the 10th century. The White Lotus proved to be very popular with their anti-Yuan sentiments and inspired rebellion. Many rebels chose to wear red turbans, and so this particular rebellion has been called the Red Turban Rebellion. The Red Turban Rebellion wasn't exactly a united effort to overthrow the Yuan, although this was likely to be the inevitable outcome. Instead, it was the rising of a population under various local warlords, who would all be looking to take a portion of land for themselves in this fragmenting society. One young man who had suffered due to the turmoil of the 14th century Yuan China was a man called Zhu Yuanzhang. He had a very poor childhood as a member of a simple peasant family, and even the Buddhist monasteries could not afford to keep him accommodated. All of his family had died as a result of the famine caused by the flooding of the Yellow River. Understandably, Zhu Yuanzhang was highly interested in joining a part of the Red Turban Rebellions, and he would join the rebellion headed by a man called Guo Ziqing. Zhu Yuanzhang was highly respected and would be elevated to second in command and allowed to marry Guo Ziqing's daughter. When Guo Ziqing died in 1355, Zhu Yuanzhang became the first in command, and he would take control of the city of Nanjing, which stands on the Yangtze River. The Red Turban Rebellions are suggested to have been instigated in around the year 1351, and one man who was highly influential was Xu Shouhui, who originally claimed to have been involved with the White Lotus movement. Xu Shouhui went so far to proclaim himself as an emperor, but ultimately one of his allies called Chen Yuliang assassinated him and assumed his power. Chen Liang declared himself as an emperor and attacked the city of Nanjing, which, as we learned, was under the control of Yuan, a fellow Red Turban rebel. The resulting conflict between the two rebels is called the Battle of Lake Poyang in 1363. There is a case to be made for this battle to have had around 850,000 men take part, and this could make it the largest battle in world history in terms of the number of men. But we always have to be cautious about contemporary accounts, possibly glorifying the battle. Chen Liang broke off the siege of Nanjing in order to assemble a fleet to combat that of Yuan on the lake. The fleet of Chen Liang was not only more numerous, but also his ships were larger than those of his opponent. This actually worked against Chen, though, because it was the dry season, and as such the water levels were lower, causing the larger ships to become prone to grounding, which gave a great advantage to the smaller vessels used by Yuan, who would also use fire ships against these sluggish ships. When Yuan retreated down the Yangtze River, Chen Liang faced a difficult decision. Should the remainder of his fleet remain in the lake, or try to break out? It would take Chen Liang a month to decide to commit to the breakout, but when he did, it was a disaster. Yuan attacked the depleted fleet of Chen Liang, and during the exchanges Chen Liang was struck in the eye by an arrow, killing him and ending his challenge. Yuan appeared to be forming a viable challenge to the Yuan dynasty, and he would be looking to further build on his power at the expense of other Red Turban rebels who stood in his way. China's lucrative salt trade was being controlled by a rebel called Zhang Xicheng. Yuan realised that Zhang was much more likely than him to receive support from the Yuan, so Zhu looked to keep Zhang isolated. Yuan would overcome Zhang Xicheng, and then following the death of another prominent Red Turban rebel called Han Lin Ne, who drowned in the Yangtze River, Yuan would become the primary rebel. He would claim the mandate of heaven and declare himself as the Hongwu Emperor of the Ming Dynasty.
The Hongwu Emperor.
The Hongwu Emperor has been described as merciless. He would look to completely reform China and punish those who had been suppressing the native Han population while the country was under Mongol rule. Those corrupt officials were removed, and any uprisings were mercilessly massacred. Emperor Hongwu would take on a much more direct rule of the state, and he would take steps to ensure the peasant class were being much better looked after. Taxes for farmers were reduced, as the emperor would look to encourage agriculture, even taking lands off the greedy aristocracy and allocating it back to the lower classes. The threat of rebellions and uprisings was very real during this period of radical change, and the Hongwu Emperor needed to make sure that he was equal to it. He stabilised the military system, which was necessary due to the fact that the remnants of the Yuan dynasty still remained in the far north of China, so not completely eliminated and likely to support any rebellion against the Ming Dynasty. So with this northern threat and the threat of rebellions from within, the emperor saw fit to set up a system of secret police. These secret police are also referred to as the Embroidered Uniform Guard, and they were originally the Hongwu Emperor's personal bodyguards. But over time, they would develop into a covert operation that would root out any potential threats to the state. The way that they went about their business was not completely unlike the Spanish Inquisition, who, although were a totally unrelated faction on the other side of the world, were partially contemporaneous to the Embroidered Uniform Guard, which served throughout the entire tenure of the Ming Dynasty. The Hongwu Emperor would also localise his armies so that there were military districts. The local districts were responsible for their own recruitment and training that would more closely resemble the system used by the Tang dynasty, which existed from the 7th to the 10th century. The Hongwu Emperor certainly made some strong reforms to China during his reign as the first Ming Emperor, but he was utterly ruthless to those he opposed, with thousands being executed during his rule. The Hongwu Emperor was almost 70 years old when he passed away in the year 1398, and the physicians responsible for his health care were executed as a consequence. A ritual sacrifice of a few dozen concubines is also recorded. He outlived his crown prince, so the rule of the realm passed into the hands of his grandson called Yuan, who ruled as the Jianwen Emperor. The Jianwen Emperor seemed to have a genuine desire to bring peace to Ming China, but others in his family branch had other ideas and were ready to challenge the new emperor. The Jianwen Emperor aimed to stay close to Confucianist ideals. His greatest opponent was his uncle, a son of the Hongwu Emperor named Zhu Di. The Jianwen Emperor had very quickly recognised the threat of his uncles and endeavoured to diminish their power, and there would be a pushback against this. Zhu Di was the one who took charge of the rebellion against their nephew the emperor. The resulting civil war was called the Jingnan Campaign. Zhu Di had a substantial army thanks to the military reforms of his father, which encouraged the districts of China to raise their own armies. The conflict lasted for 3 years, straddling the dawning of the 15th century. Zhu Di would take city after city until the capital city of Nanjing was isolated. Despite the Jianwen Emperor's repeated attempts to negotiate with his uncle, the attack on Nanjing was not delayed. In desperation, the Jianwen Emperor set ablaze his imperial palace, and those inside perished, including the Jianwen Emperor himself. In the aftermath of the blaze, the body of the emperor was never found, leading to a theory that the emperor may have escaped. Despite this possibility, Zhu Di would claim to be the new emperor, ruling as the Yongle Emperor from the year 1402.
The Yongle Emperor.
The reign of the Yongle Emperor is considered by many to be a golden age of the Ming Dynasty. It appears that a successful emperor during the early Ming era would have to rule with an iron fist, like the Hongwu Emperor, or risk being overrun like the Jianwen Emperor. So the Yongle Emperor did not waste any time in taking appropriate action to consolidate his rule and the security of the realm. With Nanjing destroyed, the Yongle Emperor relocated the Chinese capital to Beijing, closer to the northern borders and the threat of the Mongols. The Yongle Emperor would begin construction of a great palatial project in the city of Beijing, which has come to be known to us as the Forbidden City. The intention was that this complex would serve to be an exclusive area of recluse for the emperor and his closest officials, confidants and guests. It has become the largest palatial complex in the world, with thousands of buildings on its grounds. Its magnificence made it the imperial palace through the Ming Dynasty's rule of China and beyond, and today it serves as a museum. The Yongle Emperor was deeply passionate about art, and this would be reflected in the progression of porcelain production. The quality of Ming porcelain was already very impressive, but some of the wares produced during the reign of the Yongle Emperor were considered to be very fine indeed, and suitable for overseas trade. The porcelain could be delicate and elegant, and demonstrating quality artwork, and it is prized to this day. The Yongle Emperor also concentrated on quality silk production, which would once again be geared towards encouraging a healthy trade relationship with overseas territories. The plan was that Ming China would put a great effort into exploiting the opportunities of the maritime Silk Road, which was a well-sailed route by this period. The Yongle Emperor would build a fleet for the purpose of the transport of goods both in and out of China. A court eunuch by the name of Zheng would be the most celebrated admiral of the Yongle Emperor's reign. Zheng expeditions would take him to many corners of the Indian Ocean and its tributary waters in the aim to look for trade opportunities and obtain the loyalty of other kingdoms. 7 major expeditions took place both during and after the reign of the Yongle Emperor. It is said that over 300 ships and almost 30,000 men could be sent on these expeditions in fleet sizes that were unparalleled anywhere in the world until the industrial age. Some of the ships were huge and laden with treasure bound to entice foreign rulers. The ships were sailed with the assistance of magnetic compasses that the Chinese had been developing expertise in creating for many centuries, leading back to the time of the Han Dynasty. The sheer amount of treasure taken on these journeys was designed to impress the foreign kingdoms, so much that they would pledge a tribute back to Ming China. Very many ambassadors of many kingdoms would sail back to China with Zheng He to present their kingdom's tribute to the emperor. These ambassadors would then be returned to their homes during the next of Zheng He's expeditions. The expeditions would go from Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent all the way down the East African coast and up to the Red Sea as far as Egypt. While visiting the coastline of the modern country of Kenya, Zheng He would meet the Sultan of Malindi, who presented him with a giraffe to take back to China. When this strange creature arrived back in China, many believed that it was the mythological Qilin that was regarded as one of the 4 noble animals of Chinese culture and known for its benevolence. The arrival of this creature further validated to the Chinese public that the Yongle Emperor was indeed ruling with the mandate of heaven. In fact, many animals were brought back to China from African shores, including rhinos, lions and ostriches. Although this must have been dangerous, the greater danger was from those looking to plunder the exotic wealth of the Chinese fleet. Sumatran pirates would attack the fleet in great numbers, but Zheng He was indeed prepared for this, and he was able to successfully defend his fleet, killing great numbers of his opponents and proving Zheng He to also be an adept military commander. The tributes obtained from these voyages would aid the economy and allow the Yongle Emperor to invest in domestic projects such as improving the Great Wall to help defend the northern borders from the Mongols, improving the Grand Canal to aid with the efficiency of commuting, and improving the towns and cities within China. During our episode about the Song dynasty, which ruled China from the 10th to the 13th centuries, we spoke of the innovation of the movable type system, which enhanced the efficiency of printing. The Yongle Emperor took advantage of this opportunity to create literature for many by commissioning over 2,000 scholars to create a work called the Yongle Dadian, which was a huge encyclopedic project which took around 5 years to complete. All of this would add to the prestige of China being globally perceived as the greatest power of the Eastern Hemisphere. The Yongle Emperor died in the year 1424. He was a man in his 60s and he died while leading a military campaign against the Mongols to the north. His death ushered in a period where a shift in priorities meant that the expeditionist Zheng He would not be asked to continue his expeditions, with the priority now being the war in the north.
The Oirats.
The main problem for the Chinese on their northern borders was being created by a group of tribes called the Oirats. The Oirats originated from the forest lands and had been integrated into the Mongol sphere of influence 2 centuries earlier during the lifetime of Chinggis Khan. After the Mongols were dethroned by the Ming in China, the Mongols retreated back to their lands of origin in the north, where there remained a Mongol-run state called Northern Yuan. The Oirats were one of the ethnic groups within Northern Yuan. Within Northern Yuan, tensions ran high between different ethnic groups, and this suited Ming China, who knew that internal conflict debilitated the state and diminished their ability to be a threat to Ming interests. With some degree of support from the Ming, an Oirat confederation were able to take control of Northern Yuan. But because the rulers were required to be descendants of Chinggis Khan, the Oirats had to rule over a puppet Khan. When Yesen Taishi became the ruler of the Oirat Confederation, he would attempt to murder all of the males of the Borjin clan, which would mean that there would be no valid Chinggis Khan descendants that could be the legitimate Khan of the Mongols, and Yesen Taishi could be the new Khan. This certainly was not universally accepted by all in Northern Yuan. Before this ambitious act, the Oirat were effectively ruling Northern Yuan in any case, and Yesen Taishi had invaded Ming China in 1449. The Ming hastily assembled an army to deal with the invasion, and it was led by young Emperor Yinzong. Emperor Yinzong had been ill-advised and may not have necessarily led the army himself had he not been strongly coerced by influential characters within the Ming royal court. In an event called the Crisis of the Tumu Fortress, the Ming army was outwitted and heavily defeated by the Oirat-led Northern Yuan army, and the emperor himself was captured. Until now, the Ming had experienced a glorious age of dominance, but this defeat was a major catastrophe, and although the emperor's life was spared and he was eventually released, as with many shocking defeats of this nature, the defeat had profound effects on the internal stability of the realm and the international perception of the Ming strength and ability. Attempts were made to further enhance the Great Wall, but the Ming would have to take a much more defensive attitude to their northern borderlands, and were to count their blessings that the Northern Yuan were not in a position to push deeper into China on this occasion.
The Portuguese.
We learned of the Portuguese presence in the Far East during our episode about the Ashikaga shogunate of Japan earlier in the volume. China had had an established trade relationship with Japan, but when the Portuguese explorers arrived in China for the first time, the status quo of these trade relationships would be disrupted. The Silk Road had not been used with the same vigour as in previous centuries. It is likely that the fragmentation of the vast Mongol Empire during the 13th and 14th centuries made it very difficult for the Ming to use this route, and conscious decisions had been made to no longer go to the expense of sending treasure ships westwards in the hope of a long-distance international trade relationship using the maritime Silk Road. The arrival of the first Portuguese explorer in China is believed to have been in the year 1513, and this would be the beginning of a story of a direct relationship between Portugal and China, which we can track through to the modern age. The Portuguese had been very active along the maritime Silk Road from Europe, along the coasts of Africa and South and Southeast Asia, and they had been establishing trading posts as far east as the Strait of Malacca. When the Portuguese violently destroyed the Malacca Sultanate and gained control of this vital and lucrative maritime trade route which separated China from the Western world. This is how the Portuguese created the direct link with China. Some historians note the difference between Portuguese explorers and ambassadors and the Chinese explorers and ambassadors under Zheng He that we mentioned earlier in the episode. It does appear that the Chinese were looking to develop relations with other territories by using treasure to entice connections. The Portuguese, on the other hand, would turn aggressive if negotiations didn't go their way, and as with the Malacca Sultanate, would be ready to destroy to get their own way. Initial contact between Portugal and China seemed quite open and amicable, as a new trade opportunity was an interesting venture. The Portuguese nature for violent solutions became apparent to the Chinese though, who became very concerned for their security as the Portuguese attempted to create trading posts of their own on Chinese islands and territory. The Portuguese desire to monopolise the trade route to China was also a concern, and so the relationship was not running smoothly. The Portuguese were not ready or willing to lose the lucrative opportunity to enjoy the exotic goods of China, and China could certainly benefit if the relationship was a healthy one. The East China Sea was a dangerous body of water with the operation of well-called pirates of Japanese origin. One thing that the Portuguese did do was help to combat the threat of the well-called pirates that troubled the coastal settlements of China. The Chinese would eventually grant the Portuguese the ability to create a colony on a small area to the west of the Shizi estuary in the south. The colony is known to us today as Macau, and it remained Portuguese all the way up until the year 1999. While the Portuguese had successfully monopolised the maritime Silk Road's easternmost reaches, other European nations were concerned as they competed with each other for the right to own important shipping lanes and take advantage of the exotic trade opportunities of the globe. Throughout the 16th century, the Netherlands had been a possession of Habsburg Spain, but by the end of the century it was achieving independence during a protracted war with the Spanish. The Dutch surged into a program of exploration and colonisation all around the world, including the islands of the East Indies, which we more commonly know today as the Malay Archipelago. This would encroach on the established maritime route that the Portuguese had established, and this culminated in an event which occurred in the year 1603, which would have serious ramifications for the future of international maritime law. At the eastern end of the Malacca Strait is the Singapore Strait, which is the last narrow strait of water which separates the Malay Peninsula from the islands of the Malay Archipelago. At the mouth of the Johor River, the Portuguese carrack or trading ship called the Santa Catarina moored overnight during its journey from China back to Portugal. 3 Dutch ships under the command of a naval admiral called Jacob van Heemskerk were also moored in the same area, and the temptation was too much for van Heemskerk, who ordered the attack on the Santa Catarina. Bales of raw silk and fine porcelain was stolen from the Santa Catarina, and the market value of the goods was highly considerable. I've seen one estimate stating that it increased the capital of the Dutch East India Company by over 50%. Back home in the Netherlands, the Dutch would be highly concerned that the international world may perceive this as an act of piracy. But there was also another perspective from the Dutch side, that the Portuguese had unfairly monopolised this trade route and violently slaughtered any opponent to it, whether they be Dutch merchant ships or those native peoples along the route who had fraternised with the Dutch. As far as some were concerned, this was not an act of piracy, but the Portuguese had it coming to them. A young lawyer from the Netherlands called Hugo Grotius wrote a book called Mare Liberum, which defended the rights of the Dutch East India Company by stating that the high seas were free and international, and that no country had any right to own them or deny passage. And this concept was popular and has influenced modern maritime trade laws.
Decline.
Time and time again in Chinese history, we have seen a similar cycle of events leading to the decline of a dynasty, the coming of a new one, a period of relative peace and prosperity followed by a decline due to corruption, high taxation, poverty and subsequent revolt, leading to a decline of the dynasty. The Ming Dynasty was no different. Court eunuchs were beginning to yield more power as later emperors were becoming weaker and influenced by those around them. The tensions between the Dutch and the Portuguese over the maritime trade routes to China caused disruption to trade, and this had an effect on the Chinese economy. The gentry, that being the class of people beneath the nobility, were taking advantage of tax loopholes to avoid paying taxes, and it was the peasant class that were picking up the bill. Different movements emerged in direct conflict to each other about the future path for China, and these movements would sometimes come to violent means in order to push their own agenda. One movement called the Donglin movement sought to revive lost Confucian values, but an opposing power-hungry eunuch called Wei Zhongqian imprisoned and executed many top Donglin representatives before the Chongzhen emperor eventually sent the embroidered uniform guard to arrest Wei Zhongqian, leading him to commit suicide. Way back in the 13th century, the Mongols had defeated the Jin dynasty of northern China. The Jin dynasty was ethnically Jurchen, who were a peoples that had originated from a region called Manchuria, which was northeast of China. Now, in the 17th century, these people were back, and we refer to them during this period as the Manchus, a somewhat synonymous term to Jurchen. The raids of the Manchus on the Chinese territories was costly for the Ming to defend against, and now a series of events would lead to a very familiar pattern of events. Flooding of the Yellow River led to the destruction of farmland and subsequent droughts and famine, and this exacerbated rebellions across the country due to the population's belief that Ming rulers were losing the mandate of heaven. Now we are transported all the way back to the final years of the Yuan dynasty, when the same sequence of events led to the fall of the Yuan and the rise of the Ming. One particular rebellion was that led by Lu Zucheng, who led a peasant rebellion against the Zhongzhen emperor of the Ming Dynasty. Li Zicheng successfully took control of the city of Xi'an in 1644 and declared himself emperor. The Zhongzhen emperor was helpless in his capital city of Beijing, as his armies were fighting against other invasions and rebellions, and some of his greatest statesmen were being executed elsewhere in the realm. As Li Zicheng marched on Beijing and breached the city's outer defences, the Zhongzhen emperor knew that there was no escape and committed suicide by hanging within the confines of the Forbidden City. This event marked the end of the Ming Dynasty. This now marks the end of our story of medieval China, but rest assured that during Volume 5 we will explore the transition of power in China during the early 17th century that led to the rise of the Qing Dynasty.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode on Ming China. And we've reached the end of the Chinese episodes. How good is that? We've done it all. Less until Volume 5, of course. Now, for all of you who enjoy the podcast, all of you who appreciate the podcast, and anyone that'd like to support the podcast, if you enjoy the podcast, you want to support it, you can. Just visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. Click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. You can make a contribution for as little as $1 a month. And when you do, you qualify for rewards. You can still qualify for them even if you only donate $1 a month. You can actually accrue the milestone, let's say, that you require to win the reward or the gift. You will also become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati. And we have a new member to welcome this week, Victoria Esther Mole Moreno. So thank you very much and welcome into the History of the World podcast Illuminati. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, please do. I love to get your messages. Drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. That's always the best way. Email in. If you want to follow the podcast, you can. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads and Mastodon. But there's no better way to send me a message than via the email address. So don't forget that. If you can't get enough of the podcast, then look out for the special debrief episode that comes out alongside this one. There'll be bits and pieces about the construction of this episode and a bit of news from around the History of the World podcast.
Listener messages and reviews.
I think during one of our previous episodes, more recent ones, I can't remember which one, but I did open it up to all of you to make suggestions about what Volume 5 should be called. And Justin Newbury, I beg your pardon. Yeah, Justin Newbury has wrote in. He wrote in a couple of weeks ago. And he's written in again has put, I was listening to your episode about the travels of Marco Polo in the court of Kublai Khan earlier, and the debrief episode, which, by the way, I appreciate being able to access now. Yeah, much better, isn't it? And I enjoyed it very much and learned a lot. Also, I heard you ask about what the next period in history ought to be referred to as. I believe titling this one could be somewhat tricky compared to some of the ones you've already been through. I don't know what would be best, but early modern period is one I've heard used. The Age of Exploration is, of course, a very popular one. Early Renaissance is another. Colonial period could possibly be used. Those last couple may be too specific or not specific enough, though. If it were up to me, I'd most likely go with the early modern period first, since it's general and inclusive, and the Age of Exploration as a second choice, since everyone is familiar with it. Thanks, Justin. What I'd like for us to do, they're all excellent suggestions, and I think you've encapsulated all of the big terms for that period, all in that one paragraph. So well done for that. That's quite good. However, I've got to call it in line with the other volumes. So the other volumes being the prehistoric world, the ancient world, the classical world, the medieval world, and then what's next? The what world. So if anyone's got any ideas, and maybe you'll be able to use one of Justin's suggestions there to formulate a name for Volume 5. And what I may do, I'll take all of them and we'll do a little voting system, a bit like the Ancient World Cup, that kind of thing. So we'll do a little voting system, and the listeners to the History of the World podcast can be the ones to choose the name of Volume 5. So I think that's the way we'll do it. So send your suggestions in. I'm all ears. Now, there was one review this week from Lizard Damter from the USA, who put, I love your podcast for its interesting information about history. You saved me from my little brother's boring podcast. Now that we started your great podcast, I don't need to dial with me little brother. I'm loving the podcast. I am at the Maya episode. Love your podcast. From Leon from Switzerland. Okay, so that's strange because the review says it's from the USA, but maybe you're originally from Switzerland. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much. A 5-star review always helps the podcast out hugely. When you write a review, it gets us up the charts. So if you haven't done it already, then please do it. Next time on the History of the World podcast, before we venture down to Southeast Asia and all of the interesting, fascinating kingdoms that emerged in that area of the world, we need to just explore a big thing that emerged in China during the medieval period, and something that has influenced the world as we know it in the last millennium. And that is gunpowder. So we're going to explore what gunpowder is and how it became what it is, how we know it to be today. A lot of people may believe that gunpowder was invented and suddenly the world changed. It wasn't like that at all. It had to evolve into something that was significant in terms of warfare. So we're going to explore that journey of gunpowder. So that's one to look forward to. Very, very interesting topic. Now then, if you haven't had enough, because we're just about to sign off now, but if you haven't had enough, then look out for the debrief episode. An extra 10-15 minutes of chit-chat about the podcast. But until then, thanks ever so much for listening, and don't forget to be good.
Have no fear, Chosen Foods is here to defend your favorite foods from the forces of seedy oils and sketchy ingredients. With cooking oils, salad dressings, and mayo, all powered by the good fats from 100% pure avocado oil and simple, delicious ingredients. Chosen Foods.
Meet the new iSims, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSims helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSims, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.